Hello, everyone. This is Admiral Jamie Foggo, broadcasting from the Center for Maritime Strategy at the Navy League of the United States, just outside Washington, D.C. You're listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. We aim to provide you with the highest quality analysis on the most pressing maritime security challenges by joining in conversation with key experts and practitioners. This season is produced with support from Dataminr. Dataminr is recognized as one of the world's leading AI businesses. The company's clients are the first to know about high-impact events and emerging risks so they can mitigate and manage crises more effectively. Dataminr solutions are relied on 24/7 by hundreds of clients, including the Department of Defense, in over 100 countries across 6 continents to help them solve real-world problems. And I'll talk about 2 of those reports today in our podcast. Our honored guest today is Major General Borys Kremenetskyi. Borys, welcome. He's from the Ukrainian Air Force and currently the Ukrainian Defense Attaché at the Ukrainian Embassy in Washington, D.C. During the Cold War, Major General Kremenetskyi started out his career under the umbrella of the former Warsaw Pact. Between 1983 and 2000, General Kremenetskyi held various Air Force command, staff, and administration positions at the squadron, regiment, and heavy bomber division level, including flight engineer, chief of squadron group, senior regiment engineer, and chief engineer of the heavy bomber division. Before the fall of the Berlin Wall, he was flying missions around Eastern Europe and Northern Europe. Later, his international and operational experience included military advisor at the UN mission to Tajikistan from 1995 to 96, deputy branch chief at the Cooperation and Regional Security Division, NATO International Military Staff, 2002 to 2006, Director, Euro-Atlantic Integration Department of the Armed Forces of Ukraine until 2010, and from 2010 to 2014, the Defense Advisor for the Mission of Ukraine to the European Union. Following his tour as the first Deputy Chief, Military Cooperation and Peacekeeping Operations General Directorate of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. From the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian War, twice, from July till December 2015 and July till December 2016, he has been deployed as head of the Ukrainian side of the Joint Ceasefire Coordination and Control Center for Eastern Ukraine, the JCCC. Following this assignment, he served as Defense and Air Attaché, Embassy of Ukraine to the United Kingdom from 2017 to 2020, until taking over his current appointment here in Washington, D.C. as Defense Attaché for the Embassy of Ukraine to the United States of America. General Kremenetskyi's professional military education includes being a student at the Kharkiv Air Force Engineer Academy, a student at the U.S. Air War College Maxwell Air Force Base, a student at the National Security Course John F. Kennedy School of Government. I'm a graduate myself. He also attended various schools at the NATO Defense College in Rome and the NATO School in Oberammergau and the George C. Marshall European Center for Studies in Garmisch. Today, we're also joined by another friend, Major General Peter Fuller, United States Army. Peter has been a friend and advisor to General Kremenetskyi in many capacities for the last few years, and he has 30 years of experience leading the Department of Defense operational and acquisition management organizations, as well as over 10 years of business experience advising clients in the defense industry. Before joining Cypress International, a consulting company headquartered in Northern Virginia, Peter served at all levels of the Department of Defense acquisition management organizations and was previously a program executive officer, as well as a deputy commander for the NATO training mission in Afghanistan. Peter asked me to keep his bio short, so I will stop there and just talk a little bit about his education. A master's degree in resourcing of national security studies from the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, a master's in logistics management from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff course, and a master's in public administration and personnel management from Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania. He's got a BA in history and political science from the University of Vermont. Peter is also a great friend of mine. Peter, welcome to the show. Thank you. Well, before we start with our dialogue with General Kremenetskyi, folks, let me point out that as Commander of 6th Fleet from 2014 to 2016, one of my tasks was to assist in rebuilding the Ukrainian Navy after Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. That was significant because the Ukrainians lost about 85% of their ships, if I'm not mistaken, right, Boris? And the port of Sevastopol, as well as the schools and the academies that went along with that port. So I frequently went to Odessa for exercise Sea Breeze, and I was there in 2014, and I met the Ukrainian CNO, who General Kremenetskyi knows, Admiral Sergei Haiduk. And as a departing gift, Admiral Haiduk gave me a beautiful oil painting of the Black Sea, and he said to me, "This is a simple seascape, but put it up in your office and look at it every day and think of us." And since 2015, in any office that I've had in here at the Navy League, it's up on my wall. I look at that picture every morning and I think of Ukraine. Now, after Admiral Haiduk, Admiral Voronchenko took over as CNO of the Ukrainian Navy. He was not intimidated by the Russians, and he engineered the Mosquito Fleet initiative that made a run on the Kerch Bridge in the Sea of Azov in 2018. It ran into an armed attack by Russian FSB units that fired on the Ukrainian ships. The Ukrainian tugboat and 2 patrol craft were taken prisoner, and 27 Ukrainian sailors spent the next 2 years in a Russian civilian prison in Moscow. They were charged in a criminal court. They were in uniform, and that's a clear violation of the Geneva Convention. Thankfully, 2 years later, due to negotiations, they were returned to Ukraine. And following Admiral Voronchenko came Admiral Nishpapa, the architect of the attack on the Russian Black Sea flagship Moskva. Since then, Ukraine has written the book on asymmetric warfare using uncrewed systems to push the Russians out of Sevastopol all the way back to the port of Novorossiysk in Russia. I find, Boris, the tenacity and resilience of all of our Ukrainian warfighters to be inspiring. So we always include in our podcast a naval term, and today's naval term and definition is asymmetric warfare. It goes like this. Asymmetric warfare is when unconventional strategies and tactics are adopted by a force when the military capabilities of the two belligerent powers are not simply unequal, but are so significantly different that they cannot make the same sorts of attacks on each other. In effect, Ukraine is the mouse that roared. In response to an unprovoked attack on its territory in 2022, Ukraine has punched back hard against a nuclear superpower, and now 2 years into that war, it is still holding its own. So today we're going to get some feedback from General Borys Kremenetskyi, if I may call you Boris.
Absolutely.
Boris, please tell our audience what it was like to grow up in Ukraine during the Cold War. You went to Kharkiv Engineering School to become a flight engineer, you know. I think you told me you went in at 17 years of age. What was that like, and what was your vision of the future?
Well, good morning, everyone, and it's pleasure and honor to talk to this distinguished audience. First of all, I'd like to thank you, the United States, for the support which Ukraine receives. It would be extremely difficult to survive without this support, and we are very grateful for this. Well, it's my story is a story of millions of boys which are in Ukraine, which were dreaming to fly aircraft, which were dreaming to sail somewhere, or which were dreaming to be army commanders, whatever. I dream to be to deal with the aircraft, and I joined Air Force Engineering Academy, and I've graduated with master degree in avionics.
Wow.
And so I'm electronic engineer by background, and I was sent after academy to the heavy bomber regiment, which used to fly first Bears. And
No kidding. That's interesting.
And then I switched to Backfire Regiment because my unit was Poltava Regiment, was rearmament for the new type of bomber, was Tupolev 22M3. So that was the first regiment within Soviet Air Force to receiving these bombers. And I used to go to different factories to learn avionics and to receive this aircraft from the industry. And I should mention here, which maybe we didn't plan, that this Poltava Air Base, it's also part of the United States Air Force history. Still at that time was U.S. Army, Army Corps like this, not Air Force. But in 1944, the United States, together with Soviets, they launched so-called frantic shuttle operations. Frantic when B-17 took off in the United Kingdom, bombed Romania oil refineries, and landed in Poltava Air Base. And for a few months, they were doing this kind of operations. Finally, Germans found out what is going on, and they bombed this base very severely. And this base was gathering by 3 Soviet fighter regiments on different bases. But during this Germans raid, Stalin did not allow these fighter jets to take off and to save this US aircraft in Poltava. So during one night, 70 B-17 were destroyed, around 20 Americans were killed. And
Wow.
we
Wow.
managed to restore the memorial for those killed only in 94, when we celebrated the 50th anniversary of this operation. We, for the first time in the history, B-1, B-52, and C-141 landed on Poltava Air Base, and we have joined kind of memorial service. And for this, now we opened the special memorial on Poltava Air Base for those who were fighting together against Nazi during World War II. Because also some Ukrainians at that during that raid were killed by German bombers. So that is very unique base within Ukraine having this history, and I'm also proud to serve on this base. And also, Poltava is the city famous for Poltava battle, when Ukrainians at that time supported Swedes. We already at that time were trying to fight for our independence. So, in a nutshell, that was environment I grow up. Within Poltava regiment, I switched few positions from flight engineer to squadron chief of squadron group, as you mentioned, and I was running within heavy bomber regiment and later within heavy bomber division, which included, before it was dissolved, 140 bombers on 7 air bases within Ukrainian territory.
My goodness, that's an amazing story, Boris. So you talk about dreams of a young man of 17, and Peter was at the University of Vermont. I was at the Naval Academy, about the same age, and our dreams and vision of the future, I think, they turned out well for us. But I don't think I envisioned where we are today, 40 years after I was commissioned, with the number of threats that surround not just Ukraine that's in a full-fledged war, but the rest of the world, and certainly our allies and partners. So thanks for that. Absolutely amazing that you flew the Bear and the Backfire and the Tupolev, and love the story about Poltava, and sad commentary that Stalin would not allow the defense of that air base since we were helping the Russians in World War II. I think the audience would be interested in your perspective on the time frame around 1989 to 1991. So the Berlin Wall came down, and then the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the satellites of the Soviet Union gained their independence, including Ukraine. There was a referendum in 1 December 1991 when your country decided to be independent. And the United States recognized you the next day, 2 December, and I don't think we could have done it any faster than that. So thoughts on that? Where were you? What were your reflections? What were you thinking? And how did your perspective on the future change?
Well, at that time, I was chief engineer on a regiment on Poltava Air Base. And by that time, in 88, I would say that for the first time, our regiment was deployed to bomb Afghanistan. And that was the first time that strategic bombers were used to bomb Afghanistan. We were deployed to Turkmenian air base Mari, and from that place we bomb Afghanistan with Tupolev 22 M3, which now they launch missile strikes on Ukraine,
Yeah.
the same aircraft. So, and I believe that Afghanistan, Soviet invasion to Afghanistan, triggered the blow up of the Soviet Union. And of course, being born in Ukraine and having all my parents' house and all my history in Ukraine, I didn't even I didn't think about going somewhere else. So my decision was to remain in Ukraine, and it doesn't matter within military or not military, but to remain in Ukraine with my home, with my relatives, with my family, and that was the most important. By that time, I had a daughter, so I didn't have any other thoughts to go somewhere. And it was but I should say that it was challenge for many officers or my colleagues. Some of them were from Russia, but they didn't want to go because they married Ukrainian girls.
Oh, right.
Some of them were Ukrainians, but being in Air Force academies on Russian territory, they married Russian girls. So it was hard decision for them. Part of them remained in Ukraine, part of them left, and this movement within armed forces was around big movement was around 1994. So because legally you was allowed to move at any republic of the former Soviet Union. So, but after 94, it was like we managed to have backbone of the Ukrainian armed forces for those who wanted to serve Ukraine came to Ukraine, and we were building a new Ukrainian armed forces.
Well, thank you for that. I know, having been in Odessa and talked to Ukrainians about what transpired during the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, it split families. So grandparents who were living in Sevastopol or living in Ukraine, one son goes to the right, one son goes to the left, so one son goes with the Russian Navy, the other goes with the Ukrainian Navy, and there's kids, and they have to choose, which side they're going to come down on. And it was it was a terrible decision to have to make, kind of a Sophie's choice, if you will. Let's move on to the next question for both of you, and I'll start with you first, Boris. After Ukraine received its independence, the United States and other nations convinced Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons and sign the Lisbon Protocol on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons in 1992. These weapons were transferred back to the Russian Federation, and Ukraine became a nuclear-free state in 1994. So, two-part question. Any regrets? And second, would possession of nuclear weapons in Ukraine have made a difference to the Russian invaders of Crimea in 2014 or the outbreak of war with Russia in 2022? We'll start with you first.
Well, it's very difficult to say regrets or not, but I still believe that we had some kind of wrong assessment of national security threats or national security priorities. And also, we firmly believe in paper which was signed, which for Ukrainians, I was sure that this paper, what we call Budapest Memorandum, which guarantees security for Ukraine. So we were convinced that this document will not allow any other country to invade Ukraine because we, such all nuclear states, the United States, United Kingdom, France, and Russia, they were guarantors of our security. So that is at that time there were no any regrets on this, despite pilots and other Air Force people they were crying when we saw bombers chopped by different equipment. people who are in Ukraine, we have hundreds of missiles in silos, and these missiles were targeted on the territory of United States. So I believe with this kind of disposal of these missiles and bombers, we contributed a lot to the United States national security. So by this, we were sure that United States, other countries will guarantee Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. So that was, I cannot say at that time that it was regrets. Now we have to analyze what happened later, where we are now, and that is a story. I don't think that someone would start war against nuclear state, but again, we do understand what does it mean to keep and maintain nuclear weapons, how what burden is on economy, and
Yeah.
so on.
Yeah.
So that is my answer. It's maybe not definitive answer.
No,
But,
that's a great
it's,
answer. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a moral dilemma. It's a moral burden. It's an economic burden, and it's a security burden to keep those weapons safe. And I know the U.S. policy was to try to make things easier, make things safer, not just for you, but for the rest of the world. Peter, thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, Jamie, thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. I would say that nuclear weapons are about deterrence, and having a nuclear tip saber or arrow in your quiver might be a great deterrence. As you know, in the United States had both strategic and tactical nuclear weapons, and we have divested of our tactical nuclear weapons. I think nuclear weapons have been a great deterrent since 1945, and not having them in an inventory is something to be thinking about. The other part is the world's watching.
Yeah.
The world's watching as to what's happening. They're learning, they're adapting, and I think it could create new dynamics in the future based on an agreement that was made, nuclear weapons that were transferred, and then you see the hostilities initiate.
Thank you very much. General Kremenetskyi, we've talked a lot about the illegal annexation of Crimea. We've talked a lot about the wall coming down. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about February 22 with the war. But during that invasion of Crimea in 2014, where were you, and what was going on in your mind, and how did you get information back then? I mean, our sponsor is a company that specializes in open source information. They scan all around the world looking at social media and using an algorithm come forth with the best possible information that's been vetted. And it's really, really good. I mean, this morning when I woke up, I got one of these first alert reports that said, Ukrainian Defense Intelligence Directorate says the Russian Black Sea Fleet Tarantul-class corvette Ivanovets was destroyed by a naval drone overnight in Lake Donoslav, Crimea. So, that's pretty good intel. How'd you figure out what was going on in your own country, and where were you?
Well, at that time, I was defense advisor to the mission of Ukraine to the European Union.
The center of Europe.
Yes, and in Brussels. And my task was to maintain close relations with European External Action Service within, and the EU military committee and EU military staff was part of this service. So I was on a daily contact with the chairman of the military committee and EU military staff. It was I received information from home, and we just before talking about annexation of Crimea, we need to understand what happened in Ukraine, but that time, and we been almost 4.5 years in the mission of to the EU. We put a lot of efforts to bring Ukraine to the European Union, and we prepared association agreement, which was supposed to be signed in October 2013. But this didn't happen because at that time, President Yanukovych, he refused 1 week before summit in Vilnius.
Yeah, I remember that.
He refused to do it. And the students of Kiev universities who were dreaming for EU membership and they were dreaming about their future. They came to the center of Kiev to protest against this, and they were severely beaten by police. So next day, parents came and all adult population, and millions people came. So from that time, what we call start revolution of dignity, which was and there was bloodshed. Almost 100
Yeah.
people were killed, and we believe that they were killed not only by Ukrainian law enforcement, they were killed also by representative of Russian law enforcement, which arrived to Ukraine to support at that time president. And of course, president was dismissed by population. He ran away to Russia, and Russia used what we say vacuum of power, maybe to annexation. Maybe I don't like this. This is occupation of
Occupation. Yeah.
Crimea, violation of all international agreements and laws, which were at that time signed by Russia as well. So it was a violation of international world order at that time. So I was on daily contact with EU military leadership. We were discussing. It was very difficult to convince them that this green man, this is Russian special operation forces without insignia or whatever. Russians were doing propaganda that this is self-defense, local population, and so on. And I should say that at that time, Russian influence in Brussels was quite powerful. They use a lot of activities to make propaganda on this. So I was on daily basis trying to explain that this is the Russians. Russia is trying to occupy Ukraine and so on. So that was a situation at that time, which finally Russia invaded with troops in Donbass and Donetsk and Lugansk area. So that was a
Right.
result of this.
And they had a chance to dig in. You're absolutely right, though. You make a point on the use of the term annexation, and I always wondered about that. This is not just semantics. I mean, it really is, or was, after 2014, an occupation. And you also make a great point about little green men. We saw this on television here in the United States. And later on, I remember my time in Europe, people would talk about the Gerasimov doctrine, you know, of hybrid warfare, when in fact he himself had made statements after the fact that there is no Gerasimov doctrine. I think this was classic Soviet Stalinist style Maskirovka, where they just took off their insignia and went in. Peter, thoughts on that? I don't know where you were at the time of the annexation or the occupation.
At the time of the occupation, I was actually at Cyprus. I had retired by then. And again, a lot of people don't know history, and they don't pay. We seem to have a short memory span on how things happen and what happens. So when the occupation happened, I don't think you saw a big rise out of the United States. It was over there somewhere. I don't know what's going on. And I think that's one of the challenges. We need to understand history. We need to understand our own history, let alone how our history ties in with other countries. I mean, Boris brought up a great point of a B-17 unit located in Ukraine that got bombed by the Germans, and there's a memorial there. So I think we just sometimes don't really know our history very well and understand how it all ties together, because history does lead you sometimes to what's going on in the future and the current events.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a famous quote from Santayana, you know, those who do not pay attention to the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. And let's hope that doesn't happen again. Okay, let's fast forward, Boris, to 24 February 2022. This was much more serious, an invasion force, you know, four-pronged assault, all-out assault on Ukraine. Some in this country were surprised. Some in your own country were surprised. I remember there was hope right up until the end that there would be some kind of a negotiated process. I mean, you yourself had said that you participated in the JCCC. Where were you at the time, and were you surprised by this? I mean, you had, during your youth, worked with fellow Russians in the Air Force, and did you ever see this happening on a kinetic level that it is today? It's tragic, it's terrible, and it's horrific.
Well, at that time, I was already here in Washington as a defense attaché
Yeah.
to the United States, saying, did I expect or whatever? I can tell you that being head of Joint Ceasefire Center, I worked. It was a job to also to interact with some Russian generals as well, and at that time, I felt that something's going to happen bigger. I didn't know, frankly speaking, what, but looking at them, I understood completely that we are absolutely different. We have different mentality now. We have different approach. We have different understanding of history and different future. So it was completely. I look at them and we just different. They're whatever who is saying brothers, Slavic nations, whatever. I would absolutely disagree with this. They became people with absolutely different
Yeah.
mentality. When I look in history back centuries ago, now I can see that that didn't happen yesterday. It happened few centuries ago, and some of Ukrainian leaders who were joining Swedes during Poltava battle, they were right to join Swedes to fight against Russians because this didn't start few years ago. So when it happened, we received, of course, intelligence. We were reading newspapers and talking to our people back home. And my ambassador and myself, we started to conduct here media briefings for media that all people around should understand that this is full-scale war, invasion, and absolute violation of all international agreements, world order, and so on. So this actually in the center of Europe for the first time since World War II was this scale of war, and having in the center of Europe deployment of all weapons. Just only nukes were not deployed.
Right.
Strategic air force, naval missiles launched from submarines and surface ships, all type of weapons were deployed. So for the first time in history. So it was for us it was clear understanding that this is a war for our and for us for Ukraine it's existential war. So there are no other means to explain this. And also, what we saw later, these atrocities which Russians show in Bucha and other occupied territories, that this is not war with some ideology or whatever. This is war against Ukrainian people, and they are tasked to kill as much as possible because it is impossible to understand for human being. Why do you kill children? Why do you kill women, old people, and so on? But what they were doing, raping, robbing, and killing, this is absolutely different
Outrageous.
mentality.
Yeah.
This is barbaric, what we say, culture,
Barbaric. Yeah.
and this is not. They are not people who deserve to live in 21st century.
Yeah. It's you say Galcha is barbaric in Ukrainian language. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
barbaric.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And Peter, thoughts on that from an American perspective? You've studied Ukraine for a long time. You've worked in foreign military sales. What did you think?
Well, I was again still at Cyprus in 22 when the war started. What I saw was I was an armor officer when I started my career in the Army. And what an armor officer looked at was taking his unit and fighting. My first assignment was in Germany, fighting against the Russian hordes per se. And we always thought we were going to have tank on tank battle. That's what we were focusing
Right.
on. And then worrying about the artillery and other things. But what I saw in this battle with the Ukrainians was the effect that the individual soldier could have against a armed formation.
Yeah.
The top attack weapons, the new technologies that were coming out and had been provided to the Ukrainians really had a significant impact, in my opinion. The design of their tank with the ammunition on the floor, when you have a top attack, it can light the ammunition off. So I think you go back to your original topic of asymmetric warfare. It is changing. The battlefield has changed. I always thought I was going to go fight Russian T-72s or T-62, T-64 tanks. But now you realize that the battlefield has changed asymmetrically. You're just as concerned about a tank shooting at you with another tank as you are about having a UAS capability hitting you, or anti-armor munition hitting you. And so now you have to have more threats that you have in your lexicon to think through, how do I mitigate all these different systems?
I should, if I may,
Yeah, please, please.
To add Peter what he's saying, we are talking, when we are talking about asymmetric, we are talking about mostly some technical means or some weapon time. At the same time, what happened when this started, we since 2014 we were reforming our armed forces on wheels, I would say,
Right.
and creating very powerful NCO corps. That was one of the reasons that we managed to sustain this fast attack with hundreds of Russian tanks, which were actually, they were prepared to go on parade with World War II tactics and so on. But again, creating this mobile anti-tank group to make maneuverable warfare with javelins and other anti-tank weapons, we managed to stop this. And we should consider that, but 24 of February, we did not receive by that time any other weapons from our partners. The weapons we received, it's Stingers and javelins. So that was mostly for guerrilla warfare. No one, including this capital, believed that Ukraine is going to fight. And we were saying with my ambassador that we are going to fight, whatever it takes for us. And only when the world saw atrocities in Bucha in March 22, we started to receive 155 artillery.
Yeah.
So this changed the game. So these first months of invasion, we were fighting with, I would say, small arms and weapons, which were provided by our partners. So, and defense reform, which we did, this helped us to sustain. And also the will of people, that
Right.
thousands and thousands of people, they came to territorial defense. They were mobilized as volunteers. They received weapons and they started to fight. So when we talk about asymmetric warfare, we should not exclude the will of nation and the will of people to fight, even without having appropriate weapons and equipment. And this is also a very important factor when we are talking about asymmetric warfare, because we see that Russia is drafting their soldiers from the poorest areas of Russia. So no soldiers from Moscow or St. Petersburg. These mostly eastern, southern, what they call national minorities, where no jobs, no water, toilet, and these poorest people, they were drafted to the military. So this is different approach from what we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said so many things there that that I want to give you some comments on. First of all, the NCO situation. I mean, this is one of my favorite subjects. I saw many nations join NATO in my time in Europe from 2009 with Admiral Stavridis until I left in 2020. And as these new nations came in, there was a reform of the armed forces. They were heavy, they downsized, they became light, mobile, agile. But the key thing was they had to have NCOs. They came to a lot of our schools, European schools. And in Ukraine, you have a very effective troop of non-commissioned officers who lead in the field. You don't need an officer out there to tell the troops what to do. The NCOs, the sergeants can do it. We saw that with the small units. and distributed units with the javelins and other anti-tank weapons in the beginning. It was absolutely amazing, the bravery these young men and women exhibited. And then, on this same theme, recently, as a result of the Red Sea crisis, I've been talking to my classmate and friend Kirk Lippold, who was the commanding officer of the USS Cole, that was hit with a high explosive terrorist weapon, a small boat, in 2000 in Yemen. And it almost split the ship in half. I mean, there was fire, there was flooding, 17 dead sailors, but those guys saved that ship. And Kirk wrote a book about it called Front Burner. And he depended on his NCOs, his chiefs, to lead those brave sailors to save that vessel and get it back to the United States. And she sails again today. So you look at Moskva, right? 2 Neptune missile strikes. Again, amazing use of that weapon and that technology by Admiral Papa and the Navy, and what's left of the Navy, because you don't have ships, you're doing all on crude. And when it hit that ship, I have to imagine, I wasn't on it, obviously, I don't know 100% for sure, but fire, flooding, chaos, no leadership on the deck plate. And the ship just started to burn and flood and then eventually went down. And I hesitate to say that, that would not happen or should not happen in one of our warships or Western warships with NCOs and the type of training that we do. Let's talk about how the campaign's going. Let's talk about equipment. So you mentioned the incremental, I'll call it the incremental approach. So Javelins, Stingers in the beginning, then the 155, HIMARS, M1 tanks, Bradleys. I'm going to ask Peter. Peter, would it have been better to have all that stuff there in the beginning, perhaps right after the occupation of Crimea in 2014? Would that have made a difference as an armor officer, a Major General of the United States Army? What do you think?
Yes, I think mass matters, people matter, and the equipment that you use in that mass matters also. So I believe the Ukrainians, I'll say the Ukrainians seem to be very adaptive. They take, and I think, I don't think, I will say that they actually have a long history of innovation, engineering, and adaptation. The Russians took a lot of credit for what the Ukrainians actually developed in the past and said it was theirs. But my point is, it goes back to that first point of deterrence. If you have a credible deterrence, you have a force that is trained and manned and equipped, then I think you are a positive deterrence. And as Boris talked about, and you mentioned on the sinking of the Russian ship, leadership matters. And leadership is not just officers, it's also the NCOs. And equipment matters. Having the javelins really helped the situation, in my opinion, because that's the first time I think people saw what a top attack weapon can do against an armored formation. And then when you talk about the Abrams and the Bradleys that the U.S. has provided to the Ukrainians, look at the recent video that's out there that shows a 2-man crew in a Bradley taking on a Russian
I saw that.
T-90.
That was amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
And that just shows you a combination of things that, that if you if you operate the equipment appropriately, you're trained on it, and you have enough ammunition, because I think part of it was, the pure mass of putting a lot of rounds on one target.
Right.
You can really have an effect. But I think there's, if the Ukrainians had the equipment earlier, I think they would be in a different situation than they are now. The Russians were given a period of time to build up a very strong defense in the area that they have occupied. And that is going to be the challenge of pushing them off that area.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And Boris, as an Air Force officer, I know you're very interested in this. The coming of the F-16, how's it going? How's the training going? What are your expectations? Tell us what you can. I think that aircraft, a lot of people say, well, it won't be a game changer. I actually think it will be, and I wish that it had been there before now. But what do you think?
We were expecting, or we should rearm our Air Force for Western type of aircraft long time ago. Is point number one. Unfortunately, for various reasons, we did not do it. and F-16, which are coming as an Air Force officer. I understand that this is not one day job just to jump into F-16 and fly.
Yeah, it's a complicated airplane, right?
It takes sometimes years. We don't have years. We have weeks and months. But again, we need to train our pilots. We need to create appropriate infrastructure. We need to create system of maintenance and sustainment, which is huge tasks. What's going on now? Our Air Force, equipped with MiGs and Sukhoi aircraft, are still flying and fighting. Even we managed to adapt our aircraft to launch Western type of missiles, which no one expected that it is possible. We did it possible. The same we did with air defense to combine Western missiles with former Soviet launchers. But we do not have thousands and thousands of pilots.
Right.
So some pilots, they have to fight, and they want to fight now. They want to fly now and defend their country. So it's a difficult job to pick up pilots and send them for few months out of the country to train to fly F-16. Of course, this is very serious moral stimulus for them, or motivation to come back with another level of jets and fight. And that is a challenge. We train our pilots now in Arizona. Training already started. They flew double seaters. We train our pilots in Denmark, and Air Force Coalition, which was created within Ukraine Defense Contact Group, played very significant role in this, because it's dozens countries contribute to this. For countries who cannot contribute by aircraft, they contribute by funds or some other means. So it's ongoing. But again, it will take some time. We hope that initial operational capability of few jets will be by the end of spring. I hope. And we believe this is, when we say game changer, we should be very clear. This is first, I agree that it's going to be game changer, but few aircraft, it's not game changer. But for for the Ukrainian population, for the Ukrainian military, this is huge motivation and examples that we are not alone.
Right.
So even to see couple F-16 in the air, for population, it's great news. So that is especially, we see how now with many countries is security assistance and so on. So this will change and contribute changing of minds of people in Ukraine. And it's also different philosophy to fly F-16. So we are preparing for this. I just, as we discussed, should mention that few pilots which we believe should be fast to fly F-16, as they were killed in action. One of them, I can say the name because it was on Facebook. It was publicly Captain Savelyev, who was 26 years old. He was trained in the United States, and he was supposed to be fast to fly it. When he came back to Ukraine, he wanted to come back and to fight. Without any hesitation, he was flying MiG-29, but he was shot down and he was killed in action.
Tragic.
So, it's tragic, and this is not only one story, I should say. So, but anyhow, we have dozens and young men who are willing to join Air Force Academy, because they now understood that in future they may fly modern Western aircraft. So the quantity of people who want to join Ukrainian Air Force Academy increase, because they see kind of future for them. We also plan to send a lot of young lieutenants for language training, and we increase language training within Ukrainian armed forces. So it will somehow motivate people to learn to study new aircraft. So without, when we were talking about air support, no one would launch from Western or NATO, I would say, NATO generals would launch huge operation without shaping a battlefield. So without just destroying enemy some targets without air support, but due to situation we had to launch offensive operation without appropriate air support,
Right.
even without appropriate air defense for our troops, because most our air defense concentrated around cities to protect our civilian population and
Of course,
infrastructure.
yeah.
So we believe that providing air power with a new quality. I would also add here not only F-16, but we need also rotary wings. We need a new type of helicopters. Yes, we are good in deploying and maintaining Mi-17 or Mi-8 and Mi-24 helicopters. But again, this is yesterday. We need something to look in future, even with close combat support. And we look at helicopters, a new type of helicopters as well.
Very important. And I didn't even think about the rotary wing aspect, but you're right. For transported troops and supported troops and in contact with the enemy, no substitute for rotary wing. And tragic story about the young pilot. Our sympathies for that. Another Ukrainian hero that put country before self. And I hope you get those F-16s quickly so we can see a change on the battlefield. You bring up a really important point about morale. Even one or two flying around buoys the spirit in the esprit de corps of the Ukrainian people, which has been pretty darn good this far. Okay, we're coming to the end of the podcast. Let me turn to Peter for the last comment and then to you, Borys. So we have a supplemental bill on the floor of the House and Senate for support to a number of different things. I'm a submariner. Part of that is submarines, but a big part of that, $61 billion, is for Ukraine for both kinetic and non-kinetic support. I have another Dataminr First Alert report that came in overnight. It reads, European Union leaders reach deal on additional 50 billion euro package for Ukraine. So bravo to the European Union. Peter, if you had an opportunity to have an audience with the House and Senate majority leaders, what would you tell them about the importance of continued aid to Ukraine in light of the fact that the Europeans have approved?
Well, I would tell them that U.S. aid is very important. And it's very important to not only to Ukraine, but I think it's also important to show the other European countries and the rest of the world that the United States is standing by a friend. When you talk about the monies, so since the invasion started in February of 22, the U.S. has provided $51 billion in assistance, and as you said, President Biden has a request for $61 billion out of the total of $105 on the Hill. However, when you look at the allies, the U.S. and the allies and partners that contributed, you have to. I've calculated that the U.S. has contributed out of 100% of all the material and aid, 47%. The European Union countries have contributed 39%. And then other countries such as the UK, Norway, and Canada, who are obviously not part of the EU, and they have contributed 14%. It's a full fight from a lot. You need the support not only from the United States, which is that 47%, but you need the support from all these other countries also. And that's why that $50 billion, I believe it's for the period of 24 through 27. But why the EU putting $50 billion in also? The Ukrainians need a lot of material. And as you said, there's other things in there, such as humanitarian relief, etc. But the point is, the Ukrainians need this type of material support so that they can. We're no longer calling it an annexation, but an occupation. They have an occupation in their eastern part, and they also have it in Crimea. How do they get the Russians off that, off their soil? It's going to have to be through mass that they generate to push them back off.
Absolutely. And they're also, the Ukrainians are preventing the spread of war in the rest of Europe. And I think we need to keep that in account, because every time war breaks out in Europe, the United States ends up moving over there and getting involved. I mean, World War I, World War II, look at history. So, Boris, over to you. I mean, if you had an opportunity to make the case, what would you say?
First of all, we enjoy bipartisan support, and there are no doubts that both parties are supporting Ukraine. It's point number one. Point number two, support Ukraine. It's also in vital U.S. interest.
Mhm.
It's within interest of United States national security. We still can prevent U.S. boots on the ground fighting with Russians with our hands, but to have appropriate equipment within our hands. So we still believe that there is a chance to do it. Otherwise, it will be war is going to spill out to Europe and then NATO and all other bad consequences. So that is absolutely in within U.S. national interest. Second, I would say that when we are talking about providing equipment, part of this 61 billion, it's around 41, 43, I believe, it's going for material support. And this material support, which is going to be produced within the United States or provided from the stocks of United States Army. So we are not talking about direct money which is going to not cash money. So most of this money will remain here within the United States, providing jobs to the United States citizens, developing of the United States industry, and so on. And we already talked to many companies. There are US companies which are looking for this supplemental to sign new contracts with the government to produce weapons for Ukraine. So it's again within US interests and the increasing US economy. And also have receiving weapons from the stock is just chance for the United States Armed Forces to receive replenishment with new weapons. So we are looking from this side as well. So that is what we are going to say.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I think you clarified for a lot of our listeners that this $61 billion isn't just a check being written and going into a Ukrainian national bank. It's coming back to the United States and generating jobs and keeping industry going and producing equipment that can help you win the fight. Please, go ahead.
If I may, one short remark. We now we have in Ukraine a DoD Inspector General, who is looking with his team on appropriate use of equipment provided the United States. And I would address you to the recent report of the Inspector General, where it's written that there is no evidence of misuse of equipment which is provided for the United States. And I should say that on regular basis, we inform our colleagues in Pentagon and State Department how we are using this equipment. We provide, because on certain equipment or certain weapons we have some restrictions, so we report on a regular basis how we use, how many we use, where we use, and so on. So we're absolutely transparent. We introduce few software which can be accessible by appropriate authorities to control what is going on. So there is no any misuse of U.S. security assistance.
Hey, thank you for qualifying that. And just as we wrap up here, I want to say a little bit about the leadership, inspirational leadership in your country, from President Zelensky on down to the Ambassador Oksana Makarova here in Washington, D.C. I still remember the famous quote from President Zelensky when we offered him a plane and a ride out of Ukraine. He said, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." I think that just represents the fighting spirit and esprit de corps of the Ukrainian people. And I wish you all the luck in this campaign because it, in fact, impacts all of us. So, folks, that's a wrap. Thank you to Major General Borys Kremenetskyi and Major General Peter Fuller for joining Maritime Nation today. I'd like to thank our listeners for joining us each month. If you have not heard our previous episode, you can always catch up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. Episodes and all content described here today can be found on our new website, www.centerformaritimestrategy.org. Thank you to Dataminr for sponsorship, and thank you to our sound engineer, James Peterson, for putting this all together. Stay tuned for the next episode of Maritime Nation. And that's it.